starting to get to the bracket here, kind of see how we got to where we are right now in the tournament. There are 4 players left here. Mainstays on our circuit, Jesse Robkin just won a team tournament actually with Zach Allen, so it's kind of a teammate battle here on the left side of our bracket. And that's a 4-color blink mirror match, as well as Josh Warsaw playing 4-color blink. Real good choice for the weekend apparently. And then Nicholas Bradley on Is It Murktide, which I think is a deck that plays pretty decent against 4-color blink. Again, they have a lot of things like Solitude to get rid of your Murktides and stuff like that. But if you're going to have a chance counterspelling their big payoffs and things like that, I think it's kind of where you want to be in this matchup.
For sure. A lot of times that Isn't Murktide deck has a little bit more efficient cards and has the ability to more or less get underneath the more expensive but powerful cards in the 4-color blink deck. So there's definitely a back and forth there. And, things like play draw and hand composition do play a big part. But like you said, obviously the 4-color blink deck had an incredible showing here in the top 4 of our Lansing Energy Modern trial.
Yeah, absolutely. Drake, I don't know if anyone asked you yesterday, if you were to show up to this tournament yesterday, what would you have played?
Yeah, so I talked about it a little bit, but didn't really go into too much detail. I mentioned I would probably either play 4-color blink or the Living End deck. I think both those decks are incredibly potent. I think that they take very different angles, so it would very much depend on how I thought, I could show up certain matchups and stuff like that. But to me, those are the 2 most impressive decks that we've seen in this current modern format. Living In, it's hard to deny its power. And in the 4-color deck, it's hard to deny its consistency, right? And certainly its power as the game goes on.
Yeah, you mentioned efficient decks. Death Shadow is something that's always near and dear to my heart. I don't know that it's great right now, but that deck seemed like it was doing pretty well for a little bit throughout the day. Obviously, you run into enough Solitudes; it's pretty tough to come back from stuff like that. I saw a mill deck doing well, but obviously quite difficult to mill an 80-card deck. So I don't know. I don't know if I could bring myself to play the blink deck myself. I think Death Shadow is probably an okay choice. Obviously, things like Hammer did pretty decent yesterday too. It'll be interesting to see if the meta shifts to adapt more towards 4-color blink, or if it's something that's just kind of unassailable. Really, it's pretty tough to play around. There's just so many cards, so many choices, and they have infinite options. Just being your end deck. So, at any rate, enough of me talking about nonsense. We're gonna get down to the players, the last 4. So let's jump on down to our first semifinal match. All right, and on the left, you see Zach Allen and Jesse Robkin on the right there. So they're obviously no strangers to the feature match area. And I assume that they're playing pretty close to the same deck list. I'm going to check it out here now, see what differences there might be. But what do you think is like the best way to start out in this matchup?
This matchup I think is very much about hitting your early land drops. Wrenn and Six, kind of undeniably the best card for getting that done in the early turns for the 4-color blink deck. Both of these players, were on the same team in winning the Energy Minneapolis at the end of the last season. So you have to imagine these players have worked together in some capacity. Right. But a card I spy in Zach Allen's deck that I think might give him a little bit of an edge here in this semifinals match is the main deck copy of Emrakul, the Promised End, that he can find with his Eladamri's Call. I have to imagine that's a mirror breaker in the main deck for this 4-color blink matchup, and we'll see if that's how this game can play out as the game goes along.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Emrakul in the main deck is definitely a choice. Obviously, it means you expect a lot of this 4-color blink deck. I watched Skylar Warfield use one against Sean Gallagher. Sean Gallagher was like this incredible state. He had like an Omnath, 2 Planeswalkers, and Skylar played an Emrakul, and then just totally reversed the fortune of the game. Unfortunately, a little behind, but it does some damage like when you get it out there. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. I have to say, I appreciate Jesse's choice in Triomes. It makes it so much easier. Joe talks about it all the time when he's on the cast, but he's an old man. What's your opinion on the alternate arts? We've seen some of the new Capenna ones and the full arts Triomes. What do you like the alternate art stuff? Is that for you?
You know what? It's not for me, but it's for other players, and that's okay. I joke around with people sometimes that have like the forest that has like a million words on it. I don't even know what that set that's from, but I told them they're you're shadow banned from coverage if you use those. it's harder on us because there's a million different arts, and it's like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And like they're like, isn't that
Yeah,
your job
no.
to know all the cards? Like, okay, well I can't know 65 printings of the same forest.
Yeah, no kidding. There's like made coverage just like inherently harder with the output of cards, just needing to know absolutely everything. But
Yeah,
it's also kind of fun because you get to learn some new cards while we're at it. As
yeah.
Jesse fetches up a different Triome.
It's
This
either
one
you get
I'm
to
going to
learn the
take
new
the top.
cards, or you get to look like an idiot in front of Twitch chat and they correct you and tell you that you've been saying that's the Steam vents and it's a stomping ground for half an hour.
For sure. Twitch chat, of course, we wouldn't be here without them gracefully correcting us in the most polite manner possible.
Yeah,
Thank
Twitch
you,
chat
Twitch chat.
notoriously forgiving Twitch chat. So thanks everybody for hanging out with us this morning. So Jesse's off to a pretty good start here. Abundant growth, 3 lands, all the colors, and then that's probably the best you can do unless you're going to start off with a turn 2 planeswalker.
For sure. Yeah, that's what we were talking about early on. Neither player supporting a Wrenn and Six here. Doesn't necessarily mean neither player has one. Do keep in mind, I believe Counterspell present in both the decks could be, representing Counterspell and needing to try to juke and jive to maybe play your Wrenn and Six with a little bit of backup. So, even though they're making both their land drops, I believe that's the position they both want to be in. But it doesn't necessarily mean they don't have any Planeswalkers, maybe not really ready to fight over one quite yet. Here's an expressive iteration from Zach Allen.
Yeah, interesting. I know like conventional wisdom says not to fight over cantrips like expressive or like brainstorm, ponder, and things like that. But Jesse goes ahead and fires off a counterspell into that expressive iteration.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, does that mean Zach missed a land drop then?
Yeah,
As Jesse plays Eternal Witness to return a land of her own in order. And this shows how important it is to hit your land drops in this matchup. She was willing, like you said, to prioritize countering the cantrip, stop that land from happening, and then willing to commit an Eternal Witness just to hit her own land drop.
yeah. I was kind of thinking, this has kind of been like draw go, land go matchup, and I was wondering if maybe I don't know if that's the standard way this matchup goes, but it looks like they're willing to play that way and just kind of hit cantrips, hit their land drops, and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, for sure. And, Zach had things like Ice-Fang Coatl and Instep to help hit land drops. And Jesse does need to be somewhat conscientious that if Zach is missing land drops, obviously his hand is all spells. And, he still has 4 mana. That's plenty to cast a lot of the very powerful spells. My understanding of this matchup, though, is the crux of the game. What decides the game as time goes on, in addition to hitting your land drops, is controlling the damage that the card Omnath, Locus of Creation, can do. Because
Sure.
that's the card that really begins to snowball the game, especially in the mirror match.
Yeah, definitely. It gains you life. It's drawing you cards. It's doing tons of stuff. Gets you way ahead on mana, and looks like Jesse's gonna hit. That's pretty important. This Wrenn and Six, if they're gonna play land go, and Zach agrees and goes ahead and puts a counter spell on the stack.
Yeah, as we mentioned, Wrenn and Six, one of those cards that you kind of want to slip in through Counterspell. Zach having already, had one of his spells counterspelled, his turn to go ahead and fire one off on the Wrenn and Six. So
Yeah.
both players kind of trading on resources here a little bit.
You think
Eladamri's
Eladamri's
call. What are
call?
we grabbing with this?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I think it's too early for an Emrakul, especially based on how many lands Zach has. I would assume it's just Omnath here to try and start the engine up. That looks
Looks
like
like I think that's one of his Eternal Witnesses. He has the
yes.
other art.
You see,
So
we're going to the test early. It is 8:25 a.m. Central Time for me, and we are going to alternate arts already. So that is an Eternal Witness. So I do know that one. I'm doing pretty good on cards so far.
Yes, there you go. We got it. And
How about
there
that?
is the Chris Ron artwork of Eternal Witness. Does come in old border if that's your thing. It's my thing. I prefer the old border copies. Get it together, Zach. Powerful 2/1. Been present for a long time. Extremely powerful alongside Ephemerate in these 4-color blink decks to give them somewhat of a trump card in the late game when it comes to having a top end.
Yeah, certainly the reason why you play this card in your deck is because of Ephemerate and just the snowballing advantage that it gives you.
For sure. Looks like Zach went ahead and found Eternal Witness and passed the turn. Jesse untapped, looked like drawn and passed. I didn't even see a land drop played, and another in-step Ice-Fang Coatl for Zach. Looking for a 5th land. Does not find one as we attack for 2.
Yeah, we're setting up to be a long game here.
Well, if both players are stumbling on mana, yeah, we're gonna trade a little bit on Ice-Fangs. Does Jesse have to start getting worried about this clock that Zach is assembling with all these Ice-Fangs?
Yeah, like dropping people with the with the flyers is a pretty decent strategy. I saw that happen quite a bit yesterday as well.
Yeah, Zach has a couple copies of Lightning Bolt. It looks like in his list, one represented in hands, Solitude, and a host of other spells among the mix as well. Both players doing a good job keeping Wrenn and Six off the table here. Going to go ahead and Lightning Bolt Eternal Witness, and Ephemerate is the response from Jesse. That can't be good for Zach. Going to respond with a Solitude. That one's going to exile. Looks like Prismatic Ending didn't get a great look.
Yep, that one's Prismatic Ending. I think this is a great use of resources for Zach to force Jesse's hand. If you have, if you think she has Ephemerate, I mean, the Eternal Witness is pretty important for Jesse to get back in it. And the Lightning Bolt is for Zach really not that important. So if you think you can force Jesse's hand to get an Ephemerate out, I think this is a great exchange for Zach.
Absolutely, especially with Zach missing land drops, right? Like, I think he made this play to bolt the Eternal Witness just to prevent himself from moving to discards. And now, trading like a little bit more cards that maybe aren't the most premium in the matchup, the things like the removal spells that normally, are going to trade down on cards anyway, are able to trade with Jesse's resources. And that way, Zach doesn't have to end up, moving to discards and losing out on card advantage.
Yeah,
Looks
definitely.
like Eternal Witness, the follow up, and dress down the response from Jesse. So even more of a fight here.
Yeah, so there's dress down, gonna put a stop to that Eternal Witness. So an interesting trading of resources from both players here.
For sure. And that's why we saw Zach Allen not necessarily cast the second copy of Lightning Bolt. Could have done a little bit better on cards. Instead, cast the Eternal Witness to recoup a little bit of the card disadvantage from pitch casting Solitude. Teferi going to interplay and return Eternal Witness to hand. Got a card coming there. Looks like Jesse does find a land. Going to shock that one in. Temple Garden, it looks like.
And Jesse's really far ahead on lands here. And the Urian looms large also, and she has that abundant growth sitting on that on her land there. So it's on Zach here to kind of get back in it. It looks like he picked up a Wrenn and Six, which is a super good pickup.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice one, especially because it can down tick, right? Like the play pattern from Jesse here, she played this Teferi Time Raveler and then bounced an Eternal Witness, putting it to 1. And then there's an Ice-Fang on board that looks like it can threaten to pick off the Teferi. An interesting play pattern that maybe suggests that she has some sort of follow-up to play to keep her Teferi around.
It looks like Prismatic Ending off the top there. She launched, I think that was a March of the Otherworldly Light to get rid of the Ice-Fang also. So.
Yeah, and then Prismatic Ending to clean up the Wrenn. Good trade on resources from Jesse.
Players back at parity. Jesse goes and puts Urian in hand, so kind of a little fist bump there from Zach. He's got a grip full of cards, 6 cards, I believe, in hand.
Yeah, abundant growth. That could find a land potentially, and it looks like it does. Scalding Turn the pickup for Zach Allen, finally beginning to hit some land drops again.
Yeah, Zach up to 5 cards in hand. Jesse has 1 in Urian, and Zach has yet to put the Urian in his hand.
Eternal Witness. See, this is where maybe bouncing that Eternal Witness with the Teferi could come back to bite you. That card, very powerful due to its enters the battlefield effect. Teferi basically allowing you to redo that one. Obviously, Jesse's interested in getting the board clear, but it does come at a cost. And now that things have settled a little bit, that Eternal Witness is able to come back down, pick up an Expressive Iteration, and threaten to maybe pull Zach ahead here.
Yeah, this is not the most powerful Urian I've seen enter the battlefield. And just going to go ahead and blink just that 1 permanent, the Abundant Growth.
All right, Matt, I have to ask you, is it Yorian or Urian, like Orion?
Ah, this is
Where
so hard. This is such a hard question.
Is there an official pronunciation guide?
I'm sure that there is somewhere and someone's going to scream at me in all capital letters in Twitch chat. I think it's Yorian.
I'm not here to scream at you. I'm asking legitimately. I have no idea.
I don't know. I think it's Yorian, but I could be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong, actually. So.
Fair enough.
See someone on Twitch. Your Eon.
Your Eon. Ooh.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's different than I think both Yorion and Urion. It's Yorion.
It's
Okay.
Flying Bird.
Sky Noodle.
I
Right
like that.
away.
That's a good one. That's a good one in chat. Yorion, more like Boreon. That's a good one. Now that's classic.
Yeah, you're not into this kind of magic? Is this not? Yeah,
Uh,
I guess you said you didn't like 4-color too much when we were talking about
I
Decklist
am
earlier.
not a forest guy, so
No,
this is
really, no forests for you.
I
Okay.
am like minimal permanence guy.
Oh, really? So like a storm kind of guy? You don't like to cast a bunch of spells and then tendrils of
Yeah,
agony
just
somebody or something?
yeah, just I there's too many lands in play, and I get distracted.
So do you not like Commander either? All the permanents and all that kind of stuff? What do you're not
No,
into that?
never.
All
No,
right,
never.
all right, all right. Just wondering. Solitude going to go ahead and get rid of that 4/5 flyer. We've seen Yorion represent Yorion represent an incredible threat even in the mirror match. So being able to get rid of that one does pump Jesse's life total back up. Zach Allen at this point, I think, kind of firmly ahead on cards though.
Yeah, definitely. Tons of cards. Looks like Jesse just has a land. Looks like maybe a couple lands and a Wrenn and Six in hand.
The Wrenn and Six
No,
is a good one. And that one
yeah,
is coming down. Going to pick off the Eternal Witness. Now we have to answer this Solitude, or else this Wrenn is still under the threat of being answered on board.
yeah. And
Zach gets another draw.
the thing about this too is Zach still has, his companion is looming. Jesse's already used that resource, so Zach has 6 cards in hand. Jesse has 1, and Zach virtually has 7 cards with this companion hanging out in the companion zone there.
For sure. Here comes the Expressive Iteration returned with Eternal Witness earlier. 3 cards common, Omnath among the bunch. Now, this is one of these positions where it kind of feels like, if you weren't paying close attention, it's easy to be like, how did this game slip away for Jesse? And not
Yeah,
necessarily saying it's over, but it does feel like Zach is now firmly ahead, whereas he was the first one missing a bunch of land drops. And I'd like to give credit to Zach for how he managed his resources, right? Like that lightning bolt on the Eternal Witness with like the Solitude in response looks really suspect, but that turn I think was incredibly critical for pulling Zach ahead because he was able to use his resources to keep himself from falling further and further behind. He controlled Jesse's ability to put Planeswalkers into play and keep them in play, most importantly. And now, here comes Omnath to potentially pull himself, ahead to actually, catapult himself to being firmly in the lead and maybe
sure.
eventually winning this game.
Sure. And just real quick for everybody in the Twitch chat, thanks for letting us know about the audio issues. We are going to work on that here as soon as this game ends. We'll try quick fix, but we do know it's an issue, and we are working to get it resolved. Just FYI. But thanks for being patient with us here, as Jesse just commits another land to the board, and she is firmly on the back foot at this point.
Right. For sure. Hitting land drops isn't everything, especially when Omnath is in the mix. If we can get a trigger for mana, things can start to slip away really, really quickly. And there's a Misty Rainforest to make that happen.
Yeah.
There's first trigger, gain 4.
Yeah, gain 4. And then,
Zach
the
going to
thing
very
too is,
quickly fetch.
the thing too is Zach has another copy of Eladamri's Call in the deck
Oh,
as well, and that Emrakul.
yeah, is it
So
Emmy time? Main
yeah,
deck Emmy time?
things can get out of control real quick.
Oh, for sure. And this is maybe the play pattern Zach's been playing for the entire time. Knowing you have that in game for your Eladamri's Call makes them, I think, a little bit more valuable in this matchup. Omnath, a very important part of this mirror match. But if you have the ability to play something like an Emrakul, things can, like you said, get out of hand extremely quickly and maybe just slam the door on a game that, maybe is otherwise somewhat nebulous.
Yeah, this board went from nothing to tons of things in just a second. And Jesse going to go ahead and pick them up here. So we're going to
Well, looks
come
like,
back to us for just a second.
yeah,
And
Jesse's seen enough.
yeah, it was, again, once Omnath hits, a lot of things start happening. So I think we're going to take a quick break here and try and get this audio issue resolved. Does that sound right, Norm? Checking with her. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break here, try and get this audio issue resolved. Just a minute or so, and then we'll come back and we'll make sure we get game 2. You'll get the full match in progress, we promise. So we're going to take just a brief break while we get this resolved. Thanks for hanging out. All right, everybody, welcome back. Thanks. I hope my audio is fixed. We can't fix the way I look, which is the problem, but that's something you have to take up with management. It's above my pay grade. So hopefully the audio is fixed. It sounds like we're ready for game number 2, Drake. So let's hop on down there and get the players ready, and we'll bring you the second game of this 4-color blink mirror.
Matt, I think you look great. And you get a lot of compliments in chat about the jacket. So Frankly,
yeah.
I think you're doing better than me. I mean, I mostly just get compliments on the oven in the background.
Well, I think for what it's worth, Drake, I think you look great. So that's
Oh, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that.
absolutely.
Jesse on the play here, going to lead on Wooded Foothills in a pass. Now, both players last game, neither of them were really able to stick a Wrenn and start, really snowballing the card advantage and the land drops with that. So Jesse more or less kind of flooded out, despite the fact that she kind of had all the mana to work with. That's normally extremely important in the mirror match. We saw Zach Allen, very expertly manage his resources and his pitch cards in order to, keep himself treading water long enough to be able to use his spells to break out of his mana screw and end up winning the game. It was impressive showing, honestly.
Yeah,
I feel like not normally how things play out.
yeah, it really snowballed quickly once Zach was able to get started rolling. It just kind of swung out. Zach leads on important abundant growth to replace itself here.
Zach said, I'll see your Triome and I will make a 5-color land using the very powerful 1-mana enchantment. Obviously has extreme synergies alongside the Yorions that are both in the companion zones for both players. Jesse, just a flooded Strand and a passing of the turn. Zach's going to attempt a Wrenn and Six of his own. Have to imagine if Jesse's not playing one of her own, she has a counterspell, and she sure does. That one's going to go straight to the graveyard.
I was gonna say I'm a big fan of like jam it and just like if you have counterspell, cool. If not, like the game is gonna be really tough for you to win from that point because I resolved my 2-mana planeswalker.
Absolutely, you got to make him happy,
Yeah, almost always. So, especially an 80 card
sure.
deck. How often could they have their counterspell and turn to an 80 card deck? Really?
Well, I think it has a little bit more about there's some context involved, right? Like if Jesse's not playing anything, the odds that she has either Ice-Fang Coatl or Counterspell have to be like 100%, right?
Yeah, you would assume so. Jesse moves on to her third turn here. It's a good spot for a Teferi if she has one.
Yeah, for sure. Her Kingdom for a Teferi. That one can be cast. Boseiju, who endures the land for turn. Looks like she's just going to pass the turn.
Yeah. Sends it back to Zach. I think he actually has 4th land and a Omnath here. So scary to wow, I'm just gonna go ahead and pick up the companion here.
Instep Endurance. Perhaps not one of the strongest cards in the mirror, but a great blocker for Planeswalkers, something you'd like to go ahead and get into play. Can do a little bit of work clearing the graveyards to mitigate something like an Eternal Witness. But otherwise, I think overall a fairly low value card in the matchup.
Yeah. And this is why this deck is so hard, in my opinion, to play against. Is even has these flash creatures like Endurance, Ice-Fang Coatl. When you just think they might have counterspell, and you don't want to jam into it. They're like, okay, nothing. I'll just jam my creatures into you.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. Jesse picked up the Flooded Strand instead of, like a counterspell here with this Eternal Witness. Have to imagine that, it's fairly indicative that Jesse's hand probably not flushed with lands. Zach very quickly going to fire off this Omnath. Well, Jesse has no counterspell mana represented.
Yeah, she put down the shields, and this Omnath resolves, and that's pretty tough here.
For sure. At the very least, going to have a card coming, even if it is answered. So, going to do a little bit of work, pulling Zach ahead on some card advantage.
Both players going to do my favorite thing about Paper Magic is shuffle through their 80 card decks, find the one of, and then shuffle back and hand them to each other and shuffle again. It's my favorite part.
Oh yeah, and the inclusion of 4x copies of Eladamri's Call really just helps that out, doesn't it? Find your one-ofs with your instant speed demonic tutor, shuffle for a while. Yeah. It's magic as Garfield intended.
That's right.
I guess it truly is, right? Demonic tutor was in alpha, so like literally.
Yeah, he completely intended for this to be the case. Jesse untaps here, back on her turn. All things considered, I think Zach's actually in a pretty decent position at this point.
Yeah, for sure. The board would kind of indicate that, Jesse has a little bit more tempo advantage, right? Like she's the one that's untapping with 2 creatures in play. She's ahead on life, so she can kind of start getting aggressive, especially if she has an answer to this Omnath. But Omnath, card's powerful. We can talk about it all day long. Card's an essay of things you want. And if Zach gets untapped with an Omnath at basically any point in the game, he immediately starts to begin to kind of recoup the life loss spent in, the tempo loss because you're taking all this extra damage, but all you have to do is play a single land, you gain 4 life back. That's a huge swing.
Yeah, that's right, and that's a good card for Jesse to have there. That Endurance gonna go ahead and get rid of Omnath, then she's gonna shove in with those 2 green creatures, the Endurance and Eternal Witness. And, back to Zach we go.
Yeah, this is the way she wants to do it, right? Like if you're removing Omnath, one of the most attractive things about Jesse's board state and her position in this game right now is the fact she's ahead on board when it comes to damage and creatures. So being able to, and here's a pitch cast Solitude. I think this is very indicative of how much she's respecting the triggers from Omnath. Now, this Solitude's being done with the draw trigger on the stack. That way, Zach does not regain priority in order to be able to play something like a fetch land, and then it's kind of this Mexican standoff, right, where you could just fetch it instant speed if she ever goes to kill it and make mana. So very, very heads up play here, responding to that trigger with that Solitude, keeping Zach's board clear so that these 3 creatures can continue to crunch and, maybe close the game out before Zach can use his cards in order to catch back up, because he is ahead on cards here.
Yeah, you mentioned the tempo advantage, and that's what this one feels like. It feels like Jesse's just playing like a flash deck and trying to keep Zach things off, it's trying to keep Zach's things off the table, and she just puts her foot on the gas pedal and just comes in with these 3 creatures.
For sure. I wonder if
I
Jesse,
think she has a
these
counterspell
players
too.
know each other's deck list. Yeah, I wonder if with the way these players, they know the matchup, they know each other's deck list. I wonder if she's taking this role, not just because obviously that's how her hand played out, but I wonder if Zach's is skewed in such a way, like Jesse's has like things like March of Otherworldly Light, and maybe is configured to be a little bit better against the field. Whereas we saw Zach's like main deck Emrakul, and I'm sure that frees up a sideboard slot from our sideboard options. I wonder if Jesse realizes that maybe Zach's a little bit ahead in the mirror and is pivoting her game plan, obviously to great effect right now, in order to really leverage what she has advantage in, right? Like she has the removal spell, she has the creatures that can attack through. Do you have any kind of thoughts on taking this aggressive role that Jesse is kind of taking here in game 2?
Yeah, I like it. I think there's Zach has the Urian put back out in the companion zone and scoops him up, and Jesse's aggressive game plan worked. So who am I to argue, really?
Yeah, I mean, hard to argue with the results.
Yeah, so I think it's actually pretty great. You mentioned the difference between the decks, and if your opponent is going to, go way above you with Emrakul and things like that, I think it's a great place to be. Is maybe it's not low to the ground because they're 3 drops and things like that, but be a little bit lower and tighter and be able to push, especially on the play because you have things like Counterspell to back up, to stop whatever they're trying to do. If you're able to get a creature or 2 in play and just kind of hit for 3, hit for 4, or whatever it is, even like the little hits from Ice-Fang Coatl are pretty solid, I think. So I like that game plan. Honestly, might not serve them very well on the draw, but I think on the play it's a great way to be.
I definitely agree with your assessment. Like you said, being able to contain those Omnaths, both of them, using those Solitudes very aggressively, was great for Jesse in order to prevent that life gain and, make that critical final lethal attack that we saw there. So excellent job by Jesse. I really like being able to pivot your game plan. That's probably a line not a lot of other players would see. I think a lot of players are really interested in attacking this matchup in a card advantage axis. And so impressive showing from Jesse. We'll see how things adjust for game 3.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, we're going to hop on in and see their deck lists here. Just kind of see what's going on. So for Zach, there's these Endurance, Night of Autumn, Fury. I saw the Obsidian Charmaw do terrible things to their Tron opponent. I believe you were in the booth for that. It was actually disgusting. I had to leave the venue. I could not come back. So
It was
I
not
watched that.
pretty.
Yeah, I could not watch that. Couple Flusterstorms, couple Veil Summers, 2 Supreme Verdicts, and Chalice Voids. I don't even know that most of these cards are very good for the mirror, to be completely honest with you. I would say Fury's probably okay, but other than that, like his deck is pretty well built. Again, that Emrakul that looms in the center on the top row there. That one
Pretty good
we
one.
haven't. Yeah, we haven't seen that one hit the battlefield yet, but I assume when we do, it means the game's over in Zach's favor.
Inclined to agree with you. Yeah, like you said, not a ton that we're interested in. We did see Jesse have a couple copies of Endurance, and maybe the Fury is pretty interesting as well. But Zach's main deck is clearly very much hedged for the 4-color mirrors, maybe indicating that is the deck he thinks he needs the most game against. Maybe he feels his list is already good enough against the rest of the field. Take a look at Jesse's deck list, see what that looks like.
Jesse's pretty similar here. There's an Endurance in the main deck. I mean, a lot of these decks have some decent customization options. I think the one thing you have to have obviously is like the iterations, Wrens, Teferis, and abundant growths. But other than that, you can kind of customize it how you want. So, at any rate, we're going to
Yeah.
jump down here to the third and final game, and Zach's going to be on the play. So it looks like his hand's actually quite good. There is the Triome. And going to shock in. You know what that means, right?
What you got? Not
There it is.
Counterspell. I know that. Sacred Foundry doesn't cast that one. Here's a Wrenn and Six.
Yeah, Wrenn and Six on the play. Pretty tough. And actually, the thing is I don't think Zach has a third land, but he does have a Teferi in play too. So if Zach finds a third land here, Jesse's gonna be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, neither of these lands being fetch lands, I think, is actually really key because Wrenn can't immediately get kind of any kind of card advantage. If Jesse has access to something like a Fury, then she can remove the Wrenn before it can really get any kind of card advantage, and that way you stifle some of the bleeding. And with Jesse being on the draw, she's already up on cards anyway, just by virtue. And it looks like she picked up Prismatic Ending. That's the way you'd prefer to do it.
Yeah, big pickup. So
Big
Zach gonna go
pickup
back to
here.
Zach here. Does not hit a third land. Does hit a second Wrenn and Six.
And no Expressive Iteration trying to find a third land.
Yeah,
Does hit.
No.
Looks like 2 lands among the mix. Fetch land finally for that second copy of Wrenn and Six. So Zach maybe has the setup here. Maybe a little too late, but we'll see. It depends on how Jesse can follow up her turn 2 Prismatic Ending. Currently, Jesse having to play a little bit more reactive, but with Zach having to spew off more or less an Expressive Iteration just to hit land drops, Jesse has a window here. Very quickly fetching.
Down. Yeah, shields down for Zach, and in comes Teferi the Time Raveler. And that is a big problem for Zach to have to deal with now.
Absolutely. And we mentioned she had a window here. This is basically exactly what she's looking for in that window. Stick a Planeswalker, begin to, enable your game plan. Teferi's a big part of the mixture when it comes to these 4-color matchups because there's a lot of instant speed tricks with pitch cards and, ephemerates, all that kind of stuff that goes flying around and can lead to some huge blowouts. Teferi shuts that down from the opponent while, further enabling your own. And so Jesse's able to untap with this Teferi. I think she's in a very commanding position in this mirror match.
Yeah. Yeah, looking good. Then Zach untaps here.
Let's see what Zach can respond with.
Yeah. All right.
Looks like maybe a Prismatic Ending of his own. Wrenn and Six. Return the Scalding Tarn, play Scalding Tarn. Just a passing of the turn. Second copy of Wren's now set up for Zach. Here's Abundant Growth for Jesse. That one can draw a lot of cards with Teferi.
Yeah, I think Jesse actually picked up another copy of Prismatic Ending.
Oh, that's a good one too.
It's quite good, yeah.
And can cash in on a little bit of card advantage using this Abundant Growth. She did go ahead and pick that one back up, draws a card, puts it back into play, draws another card. So a lot of cards coming from Jesse. And here's a Prismatic Ending. Jesse now ahead, not just on board, but also on cards. Zach can't respond to that one. Could fetch, I guess, but Teferi shutting down any meaningful interaction in response to the Prismatic Ending.
Yeah, the static ability on Teferi has just been such a pain for as long as it's been since War of the Spark. It makes you can't play on instant speed to fight back. Jesse just gets to do whatever she really wants for the turn. So another Wrenn and Six down. It's pretty big considering Zach was missing land drops.
Exactly. This has got to be somewhat frustrating for Zach when you're in this position. You have 2 Wrenn and Sixes that have both resolved, and you're somehow still struggling on lands. It shows really kind of how important Wrenn and Six is to this deck's primary game plan, hitting all the land drops. Looks like it might have been a Boseiju as the pickup. Didn't get a super great look, but Zach has plenty of things he can play. The problem is Jesse continues to untap with this Planeswalker, accumulating advantage. He continues to draw cards. You mentioned the Yorians are looming, and with Jesse kind of pulling ahead on mana and cards, it's going to make it somewhat difficult, I think, for Zach to be able to keep any of these spells in play. Things like Omnath here. We're going to see that one come down. It's going to be hard to protect. But it will at least draw a card. I'm now gonna resolve.
I would say, if one card's gonna pull you back in the game, it's probably gonna be Omnath.
It's always Omnath. And just when you think you're behind, it looks like Jesse respects that as well. We're going to see this exact same play in response to the trigger. Jesse really showing a lot of respect for any kind of fetch land shenanigans that could happen post Omnath. Going to go ahead and draw a card for Zach Allen anyway. Like you said, Omnath is really the key for pulling Zach ahead. And not just catching up, but pulling ahead. It just makes so much mana. It draws cards, does it all. And I mentioned before, this mirror match is very much about controlling the damage that Omnath does. The card's really, really good in this mirror match, and just being able to use your mana more efficiently in the mirror. And Eladamri's call to pick up for Zach Allen is an interesting one.
Yeah, Eladamri's calls are really good. When we talked about the Emrakul, and we haven't seen it yet, but this game, both players are, basically untouched. So, I mean, that card, Eladamri's call being able to fetch up Emrakul is a pretty big game.
Definitely. I mean, you mentioned, these can tend to grind out quite a little bit. And, having that single copy of Emrakul to just slam the door in a game that is otherwise nebulous is a big reason why the card is represented in basically every sideboard. Zach choosing to put it in his main deck, but was not able to leverage it in the main deck game. Didn't need it, won the main deck game anyway. And Endurance in response to Zach's Teferi does threaten to do quite a bit of damage to the Teferi and maybe do some amount of work to mitigate Zach's ability to keep it in play. Going to go ahead and check that down. Return Endurance to hand.
I was going to say, you just play Ice-Fang here and, because you have to play it at sorcery speed because it's a fairy. Play it and try and hit a land drop, and Zach agrees and gets paid off.
Yeah, you hit that Steam. Vince can put that one into play tapped. Can't really respond on Jesse's turn anyway, so no one drops you want to play. And save a little bit of life. And Zach suddenly looks to be a little bit ahead on board. We'll see what Jesse's turn looks like, though. She gets to untap all her mana. We'll see what she can assemble.
I was just thinking that Zach looks like he's actually in a pretty good place here.
Yeah.
There's an Eladamri.
Fetch land from Jesse.
Yeah, I think she has
4 cards.
I think she has a call and a prismatic ending.
Prismatic Ending on Teferi seems really appealing. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get that one off the table. Jesse's done a really good job at mitigating Zach's problematic permanents, namely the Planeswalkers and Omnaths. A lot of the other chump change, things like Ice-Fang Coatls and all the other stuff, she could just let sit and play for a little bit. It's not even clear to me that this Ice-Fang Coatl has Death Touch yet, so Endurance does actually threaten to block it as well. But she's done a really good job answering these.
This is quite good for Zach. He has another Teferi, so Jesse has to act again, whether it's a counterspell or if she's going to flash in that endurance again. She's in kind of a tough spot, and especially because Zach just picked up Expressive Iteration, so he's chock full of cards in hand here.
Yeah, and most importantly, Zach's drawing the good ones, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the cards that Zach has played on each of his turns, it's been like Wrenn, Teferi, Omnath. These are the cards that are the really impactful ones in the mirror. Whereas Jesse's done a good job, using the removal spells, things like Prismatic Endings and Solitudes to keep those off the table and mitigate all that. But frankly, the questions are better than the answers in this mirror match. And so Zach, each time he plays one of these Planeswalkers, gets a little bit of value off of it. He plays Omnath, gets a little value off of it. He's pulling a little bit further and further ahead as he finds a Prismatic Ending to go ahead and answer Jesse's Teferi. She needs to find some of that Omnath action rather quickly, but she does have a turn with Zach's tapped out to do so. So we'll see what she can assemble on her turn.
Yeah, we actually talked about how Zach was behind on lands. Now he's actually pulled ahead in the land count from 7 to 6 here.
Correct. Very interesting. I mean, Zach's been using all of his mana efficiently too. So that, I think, is also very much key when you're talking about, being able to pull ahead from behind. With Zach actually on the play, you'd think he'd be, ahead the entire game. But like I said, Jesse's done a really good job of mitigating Zach's early plays. He fell behind, but using his mana every single turn, using the mana advantage from being on the play, and, also just having multiple copies of each Planeswalker and Omnath and all that stuff, he was able to put himself where he's a little bit ahead. Now, he's not as far ahead as you'd think, right? If you're talking about all the cards he's cast, you'd be like, okay, well, he should be very, very far ahead. The game's not even really close to over. He's just a little ahead. We'll see what Jesse can assemble on her turn. This is a big turn, I think, for her.
Yeah, looks like she picked up just another Triome. So a couple lands in hand. That Endurance we knew about, and Eladamri's Call, I think, are the 4 cards in Jesse's hand here.
Well, she has an untapped land. Eladamri's Call for Fury looks kind of appealing.
Sure. Clear the board out.
Does not clear that she has an untapped land, though. I think we see a Triome among the mix.
There's a fetch land hanging out in hand there. It's like a Scalding
Is there?
Tarn.
All right. Did not see the fetch land. A lot to think about with this Eladamri's Call. This is kind of what happens when you're talking about tutors and an 80 card deck.
Yes.
Yeah, we do see her go ahead and fire that one off. We need to think about what we're going to actually grab with that before we cast it.
There's a lot of choices in this deck, and all of them are pretty meaningful. It's like Omnath comes to the front of the deck as well.
Omnath could draw a card, make a bunch of mana, could put Endurance into play. Looks like Omnath is pulled to the front. All right, Omnath the grab. Not too surprising, given there's a fetch land in hand. That one can threaten to make a ton of mana.
You see Omnath Locus Creation. That card is incredibly good.
I referenced this card yesterday as an essay, and boy, does it have a lot of words on it. And all of it's good. Every line matters. Enters the battlefield, draws a card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield for the first time, you gain 4 life. If it's the second time this turn, you get 4 mana. And if it's the third time, dealing 4 damage to each opponent, each planeswalker. I think pretty undoubtedly the making 4 mana from the second land is probably the most attractive part of this card in almost every matchup.
Yes, you make all 4 of the mana minus black, so you don't get a swamp out of it, but not a big deal in this deck, I would say.
Absolutely. I think we see Zach go ahead and run back the same trick Jesse did. Response to that trigger, we're going to go ahead and Solitude pitch an Eladamri's Call of Zach's own. Go ahead and mitigate the Omnath from Jesse. That's an important one for Zach to have because, once again, Omnath has been mitigated. That mana is not available to Jesse. And even though she gets to draw a card, that's all she's got really for the turn. She can't do anything else as a follow-up. And Zach's going to go ahead and tick up his Teferi beat downs with some Ice-Fang Coatls. Looks like a third Teferi in hand.
Oh.
Zach on Teferi Tribal over there.
Yeah, Jesse actually naturally picks up this Fury for the turn.
Ooh, that's a good one. I think Zach has a copy of Dress Down in hand. That's another good one.
Oh, Endurance. Okay, well, Jesse's
Endurance in response to a fetch. Is that what's happening here?
Yep, that's what it looks like to me. So the fetch is in the graveyard. Zach going to go ahead and cast Endurance.
I guess if you're going to cast Endurance anyway, this keeps Eternal Witness from having any targets.
You know what else it could be? I don't know the exact count of types in Jesse's graveyard, but it could be a way to stop Emrakul, you know?
I think that's a much better call. Yeah, I think he's doing that in response. He probably did the math, and that untapped land might represent Emrakul mana. And so, very heads up Endurance from Zach Allen. Go ahead and mitigate not just Eternal Witness, but also the Emrakul of Promise End that would threaten to, obviously wreak havoc on Zach's board state and pull Jesse quite far ahead. And here is a Fury. And card's got a lot of good targets. Have to imagine they're dressed down in response, and that is what's going to happen here. Jesse cannot respond to that one. Teferi still in play for Zach Allen.
That is a beating. Dressed down quite good.
Very good with the Teferi, I think. Being able to shut down all of Jesse's creatures while, Jesse can't do anything about it, can't even respond, I think is extremely problematic for Zach Allen. And a Fury of Zach's own picked up. That's a good draw. You can go ahead and remove the Fury and maybe start putting a little bit of pressure on Jesse's life total.
Yeah, the Zach's starting to put his foot on the gas here. I'd be stunned if this companion doesn't get added to hand. Looks like Zach gonna shock in. Gonna pass, maybe.
A little bit of beat downs. So we saw Jesse on the play take a little bit more of like a tempo kind of role, being able to just put a few bodies in play and kind of get underneath Zach before he could really get his footholds, put him even further off balance with some counter spells. And more or less take this like kind of aggressive tempo role. Zach here on the play electing to kind of just play the same card advantage game plan that you would normally expect to see. Not necessarily getting as aggressive with resources, just sitting back, trying to hit land drops and just trying to navigate his cards in the same way. I think that is very suggestive of not just the deck building, but obviously the approach to the matchup and sideboarding. Maybe Jesse has like a little bit more creatures in her deck in order to facilitate that, especially in game 2, or it could just been the way that her hand was drawn up. But either way, I think it's a very clearly different plan from what we saw from Jesse in game 2, and it seems to be working out for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Jesse just goes ahead and scoops him up pretty far behind there, and Zach Allen, man, just turned the corner really quickly in that game. It felt like, and Jesse kind of just drew lands. Felt like she flooded out towards the end. An unfortunate end to her tournament, but congrats to Zach Allen for making it to the finals here.
An impressive run from both players. Yeah, and we saw clearly the dominance of this deck throughout the tournament. Probably, I think it was only our third most played deck in the entire tournament in general. But representing 3 of the 4 of our top 4 here. And Zach Allen going to go ahead and move to the finals. Obviously a little bit of a team kill from Minneapolis, but an impressive run for both players, and going to mean a lot when it comes to the leaderboard.
Yeah, definitely. There's like you mentioned, 3 of the 4 decks in our semifinals are this 4-color blink or deck. The 4-color mid-range deck, whatever you want to call it. That's kind of the standard deck. I think if I'm going into a modern tournament, that is level 0 to me. That is what I need to either beat or be playing. But there is one hero. I don't know if that other semifinal has gone final. Norm, has it gone final? We're gonna get word real quick. I think they're shuffling up.
Ooh.
Okay. Sounds like the players are shuffling up, and okay, great. So we're gonna go ahead and get you game 3 of that. So there's one hero left in the building that's not playing 4-color deck. So it sounds like they might have taken a restroom break. So Drake and I will sit here and vibe for a couple more minutes while we discuss that. Is there any improvements you can make? I know Zach has this Emrakul in the main deck. Is there anything else you can do to fight like against that deck if you're playing mirror matches all day?
Yeah, I think if you were only ever going to be playing mirror matches, a lot of the removal spells are a little less appealing. Things that don't, 2-for-1 your opponent are obviously not at a premium in the matchup. But for the most part, I think you can't really do that without diluting your deck too much to the rest of the field. I mean, you mentioned Murktide being the last hero in our top 4, but Murktide was actually the most played deck in this tournament by almost double. It was 13% of the metagame. I think a little over 40 people registered the Is It Murktide deck in this tournament. And it's a deck I like a lot on paper and certainly can get underneath the 4-color deck. But yeah, if you start trying to put more 2-for-1s in your deck, shaving on removal and putting more Emrakuls or whatever in your deck list, I think you're going to run into a lot of issues with your really expensive cards running more or less straight into the cheap spells from the Murktide deck. And you're going to start losing some games to that Murktide deck. It's very, very powerful and worth being respected.
Yeah, I think that's part of the thing about Modern is I understand if this deck is the best deck, which I think it's pretty okay to say that. There's so many other decks. So I saw like Mono Green Tron. I saw Yawgmoth. There's hammer decks where you need the lightning bolts. Like you said, you could remove some of the cheap removal, but like you need lightning bolt against the hammer decks, or you're just gonna get put in a dumpster. So yeah, I think you're right. I like Zach's build quite a bit. He has enough cheap, efficient things to deal with those style of decks, but also is able to go over the top with and it's a one of Emrakul, but there's the Eladamri's Call, which makes it fetchable, and you can really power through the late game. So pretty good deck building in my opinion for Zach today.
Absolutely. And, it's really impressive too. When you talk about one-ofs, there's a different context for playing a one-of in any given deck, especially an 80 card deck, based on what you want, like what matchups you want it for. So like, for instance, if you wanted a one-of sweeper for an aggressive deck, that's going to be a lot worse, a lot less effective because the game doesn't go as long. You don't see as many cards. So even though you'd have like, let's say 5 copies with even your Eladamri's Calls, that one of is still a lot less effective because you're still less likely to draw it manually, like draw that copy of it. Whereas when you're talking about something like an Emrakul, which is specifically for the really, really long games, you have such a higher chance of seeing it, naturally drawing it, even if you don't Eladamri's Call for it, just naturally drawing it because you see so many more of your cards. So it's a lot more effective. I think it's really heads up to sacrifice a single main deck slot for something that can be such a hammer in these grindy matchups and just slam the door on some games that you're even a little bit behind on. Like you said, I think it's really heads up deck building by Zach Allen. Impressive stuff.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think again, like I don't want to hammer it too much, but it's like the game plan in the sideboard. It's like, well, why don't I just like play one of these in the main deck? Who cares? It's just like one extra card, and it can't be that bad against some like the more like lower to the ground decks because it closes the game out. It shuts the door on people if you get to that point where you need it. So might be a stinker to draw on your opening hand, but you know it happens that way sometimes. You just gotta make you just gotta mulligan again. Who cares?
For sure. Well, before we go down to our second semifinals match, are we able to pull up what these players are playing for?
Yeah, let's see if we can get that up there. Uh, oh, sounds like we're starting up. So, hey, I'll tell you what.
We'll wait and
Let's
show you
jump on
after
down.
this match. Then sounds like they're ready to go.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Hey, I like Magic. It's cool. Jump on in. All right, so Josh Warsaw on the left playing four-color blink against Nicholas Bradley on Is It Murktide? All
All
right.
right. Now, the Murktide matchup does play out quite differently from what we've seen than the four-color mirror. We talked about Wrenn and Six being one of the important ones to manage, and it still is, very effective against the Murktide deck, but the Murktide is more of the aggressor, I think, in this matchup. And so that means things like, the card advantage from Wrenn and Six and all that stuff is a little less important than the keeping the board state managed.
Yeah.
Looks like a little bit of discussion about the abundant growth on the breeding pool here. And looks like Ledger Shredder coming down from Nicholas Bradley. The impressive addition from New Capenna. What do you think of this card, Matt?
Who could have read that text box and thought that card be any good? Come on now. Come
EDH
on now.
players. It was all over EDH Twitter. People were just raving about how this card is messed up in EDH.
It is an unbelievable addition to this Is It Murktide deck. It just does everything you want, in these blue-red style decks. It churns through your deck, and Dragon's Rage Channeler helps that too. So you're really powering through your deck. It reminds me of the older iterations of Death Shadow, where you would have like Thought Scours, and even back to the days when you had like Ataxian Probe and things like that. It just really churns through your deck rather quickly.
Oh yeah, imagine playing Thought Scour in the current modern context. A classic that I am very gravitated towards. I love me some Thought Scour, but when you can just do it better on a creature that also beats down and grows and loots, not just throws cards in the graveyard willy nilly, it actually you get some selection out of it. This is such an impressive upgrade over an effect like Thought Scour.
Yeah.
I love to see it. Very much my style of Magic. You talked about what you like to do. You don't like green. Well, I love me some Is It colors. This Is It Murktide deck. Very appealing to me. And Ledger Shredder right up my alley. Here's an Instep Archmage's Charm. I'm going to go ahead and draw 2 cards with that one. With no play from Josh Warsaw. Did play a land tapped. I'm just going to represent 3 lands here. Still no Ledger Shredder triggers either. Very, very kind of slow pacing on this game. Who do you think that actually favors?
It is a very weird start to me. I assume Josh has something like Ephemerate, or excuse me, it has to have some removal spells just hanging out. And I don't know if you're waiting for a better target than Ledger Shredder. Um, I would assume the answer is yes, but I think it actually favors Nicholas Bradley because be able to fire up some counter spells later and things like that. I think that's pretty good for them.
Yeah, the counterspell is obviously extremely potent out of the Murktide deck. I would argue they're actually like the counterspells are more effective out of the Murktide deck because they have so much more pressure that they use to back up those efficient counterspells. Whereas a lot of times it's kind of hard for this 4-color blink deck to both play a counterspell and play a big threat in the same turn because their cards are so much more mana intensive.
Yeah, I like this. And again, like we talked about, like this 4-color blink deck, yes, it's able to tap out, 4 mana and play a giant Omnath, but it also is able to play this game where, just wait, they attack into you, and you're like, ha, surprise, Ice-Fang. So it just does everything so well.
Hard to disagree with that. Yeah, this Ice-Fang going to be a little bit of a problem, especially if you have any ambition of getting in the red zone with this Ragavan. Ice-Fang doing a really good job mitigating that. Looks like Soken's in the pickup. We've seen that one ambush block some Ragavans as well.
Yeah, that's huge. So
let's see what do we
Omnath.
got. 4 mana Omnath. Fetch land already in play to potentially enable some, land drop triggers. We'll see how Nicholas Bradley wants to respond. This is a sideboard game, so there could be things like Veil of Summer in the mix. It looks like a mystical dispute in response to the Omnath. Very quickly going to fetch, and there is a Veil of Summer for Josh Warsaw. And wow, that is brutal. If you are Nicholas Bradley, this is exactly the kind of interactions that Four Color Blink is trying to make happen in the sideboard games.
This is quite a beating here. Veil of Summer, when that card was printed, was like the final nail in my coffin, where I was like, I can't play Modern for a little bit here. This is too much for me.
You were off it, huh? A Veil of Summer. I guess you said you don't like green. Veil of Summer is like the greatest green card.
Why? Yeah. Why does green get counterspells? Why? This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. So.
At any rate, going to trigger Ledger Shredder, and we went ahead and connived. It looks like we were thinking about Mystical Disputing again in response to the Veil of Summer. That's pretty good. That'll definitely get the Omnath. Yeah, thinking about it, that would trigger Ledger Shredder again. I'll consider. Going to go ahead and trigger Ledger Shredder. Going to connive. Growing 2 points in this turn is going to be big.
Yeah. The thing is now. The problem I have with this Murktide deck is this, though. Once this Omnath hits the table, pretty difficult to take off the table for the Murktide deck.
It doesn't die to Lightning Bolt. Card kill.
Yeah, so you don't have things like Terminates or anything like that. It's really difficult to get off the table. So looks like it's going to stick to all this. Nicholas Bradley is considering their options.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I think the Omnath, we talked about how it has a little bit of something for every matchup. And this one, the life gain, I think, is one of the big parts of the equation. The Murktide deck is very much trying to get underneath the four-color Blink deck, just put them off balance with respect to spells and beat them on efficiency and slam the door shut with something like a Murktide Regent, which we did see thrown into the graveyard with a Connive. The point is you're trying to kill them before they can catch back up. And Omnath, with the life gain ability and the mana ability, just literally undoes everything the Murktide deck's trying to do. So we really need to answer the Omnath, no matter which way you slice it, or it's not going to go great.
There's a subtlety hanging out in hand, so like that's kind of an answer, I suppose.
I think it definitely is an answer. It may not be the way you want to do it, but at this point, I think it kind of has to be done, right? We're talking about, he's going to redraw it right away with this Veil of Summer, but either way, like just answering it even for a single turn, that's a lot of damage coming across with Ragavan, Ledger Shredder, and, who knows what the context of next turn is going to look like, especially with Ragavan triggers in the mix and the powerful cards that come off the top of the four-color Blink deck. But, Nicholas stymieing the Omnath train for the time being.
That is so rough to have to pitch your Expressive Iteration to it's a trade you have to make, I think, at this point, but it is really rough to have to do that.
I agree. I also think Expressive Iteration, maybe not really the way you want to approach this matchup. Like we see a counterspell in hand now for Nicholas Bradley. When you're talking about how this matchup plays out, a lot of times, like trying to take your turn off and just do something like an Expressive Iteration to get card advantage is not really the way Murktide wants to be approaching this matchup. Because like we said, like you're just not going to win on card advantage, right?
Sure.
So maybe it's actually lower value than you'd normally expect in this matchup. Still busted card, right? Like still very, very powerful. Yeah. Still 4 copies of both decks here. I think literally all 16 copies across the our top 4 here. Undeniably a powerful card, but maybe not as good in Nicholas Bradley's deck as it would be in something like Josh Warsaw's deck. So here's an attack.
He comes slamming in, and he knows this Ice-Fang has Death Touch. I'm going to go ahead and make the trade with the Ragman here.
Yeah, I think both cards reasonable threats in their own right. Willing to give up one of his good threats and keep the other one. Push a little bit of damage through. Now, Warsaw should be able to play something with a counterspell backup this turn. Not Omnath. I think the 2 forests keeps you from being able to Omnath with counterspell backup. Abundant Growth going to fix all those problems.
So many Solitudes in hand.
And now that Ragavan's off the table, it's interesting to see Ragavan blocked and then the Sokenzin played for turn. Like we could have done something like block the Ledger Shredder and then maybe try to channel those Sokenzin and use that to answer the Ragavan. Really shows how much respect for that Ragavan trigger, I think, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I think Josh is like, well, I can't let Nicholas start hitting cards and getting ahead on mana because Nicholas only does have, now it's four lands in play. You don't want them to be able to fight twice with you. You could probably dance around one single counterspell and play a second card, but double counterspell is brutal.
Definitely agree with you there. Ledger Shredder, a 3/5 at this point. Does not get eaten by Endurance. One of the big pickups, I think, for Murktide in this matchup. Like, a lot of times, Endurance just abuses your threats. And Solitude is the way you got to do it if you're Josh Warsaw.
I like this. It's that's a dress down. I know what that one is. I've seen the doodling.
That's got to be a good one. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop that effect. A 3/2 lifelinker doesn't beat a 3/5. Going to lose lifelink 2 if this dress down happens.
Expressive Iteration.
Did we tap invalidly? What's going on here?
There's a red and a blue up there. All right.
Oh, I see. Here we go.
So Joshua down to 7 already. I think this is the power of this Murktide deck is, you can play your little things on the ground and Nicholas can still just take a chunk out of you in the air with either a big Ledger Shredder or a Murktide Regent.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're not going to get any connives on this turn, unfortunately, so that's a good time for the old Expressive Iteration.
Sure.
But dress down stifling the lifelink from the Solitude is actually big here, given that Nicholas is really kind of trying to push the advantage with a life total race. Looks like a Prismatic Ending going after Ledger Shredder. We'll see if Nick's interested in counterspelling that one.
Yeah, and he knows about that Omnath in hand because it was bounced with Subtlety several turns ago, so this is a choice you got to make here.
I think you need to counterspell it. Like, even though there's an Omnath that you know is coming, we talked about this earlier. You know you're not winning the long game, right? Like, no matter what, if you just keep giving Josh turns and draw steps, eventually he's going to win this game. So you need to keep a threat in play and keep pushing that life total advantage if you're going to have a shot.
Yeah.
Looks like another Expressive Iteration.
Yeah, your plan is it Murktide is right now is that Ledger Shredder. It's not getting counters right now because of dress down, but you have to hope that you can outpace or your opponent just bricks on a land for a turn against the Omnath if they choose to deploy it.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. Now, the Solitude does threaten to gain a little bit of life, and the Omnath is certainly going to be a problem for Nicholas Bradley. But, with Josh kind of in a precarious 7, if Nicholas can assemble like something like an Expressive Iteration into a Lightning Bolt, that's lethal, right? As long as we can discard a spell to connive.
Look at all these Solitudes that Josh has in hand. It would be really hard, to not just jam one in Nicholas's upkeep for me.
Oh yeah, they're burning a hole in your pocket if you're Josh Warsaw.
Yeah.
Huh?
Oh yeah. this is great. This is kind of the the draw to this deck here is there's a Dragon's Rage Channeler on the field, a Ledger Shredder, and you can play for 0 mana. You get to do tons and tons of digging through your deck here with this Mishra's Bauble.
Oh yeah. You get a Surveil, you get a Loot. Now, do you stack the Surveil before the Connive trigger? How do you stack those? They both trigger at the same time.
Yeah, I think you just surveilling first here. This is pretty good.
I like surveilling first as well. Get a little bit of selection on your draw discard. See if you can find yourself some lightning bolts. Especially, I think lightning bolts are the cards you're looking for, trying to close this game right now. And here's an Expressive Iteration follow-up. But I think we need to find a red land too, if that's something that we want to reach for.
Yeah, this is so difficult. So this is the squeeze again that I think Josh was trying to stop Nicholas. So if Nicholas had hit, one time with Ragvan, he has extra treasure and extra mana. So now Nicholas has to choose: do I hold up Counterspell or do I jam Expressive Iteration? And goes ahead and iterates here.
Interesting to see Josh take that hit.
Yeah.
Because now he's in bolt range. He could Solitude his own Solitude, I think, to gain some life. But like you said, it's hard for me not to go ahead and Solitude that Ledger Shredder. Just keep bolt from being in the equation at all. Maybe Lightning Bolts aren't even in Nicholas Bradley's deck anymore. Maybe that's what he's counting on.
Could be. Man,
I think that's ambitious, but I think it could be.
Pretty brutal for Nicholas Bradley here. No land here in that Expressive Iteration. So he's just kind of at the mercy of whatever Josh wants to do next turn.
Yeah. Unholy Heat. would be the card to look for if Omnath does actually enter this equation. Once again, we're not going to beat Omnath, just Josh attacking with Omnath over and over again. But the graveyard's full enough now at this point that I think Unholy Heat, maybe you could Unholy Heat an Omnath and still find a way to come back and win. The problem is that looked like a fetch land on top of Josh Warsaw's deck. And if it is, Josh can have a lot of mana on his turn.
So I believe it was an Omnath, but there is a Flooded Strand hanging out on the top of Josh's deck, land pile there. Man,
Yeah,
brutal
that's true
stuff.
too.
Brutal stuff for Nicholas Bradley.
Attack for 3. That would put Josh back to 6. Now, that's still lethal, so I think you're okay with this if you're Nicholas Bradley. Still got 6 power to play.
Yeah.
Actually, 7. I'm sorry. 7 power, but 6 would be what Josh goes to. Still thinking about taking an action. We do see a counterspell in hand. Can't cast that one without a land off the Expressive Iteration.
This 4-color deck is just capable of turning the corner so incredibly quickly.
Yeah, that's really the power of it, right? Like they have so many tools to kind of blow you out with pitch cards, and then if you don't have the right sequence, if you can't, slam the door on them, they're going to quickly flip the script, and suddenly you're going to find yourself behind where you were, feeling very likely to win.
Yeah, like here comes this Omnath, and Nicholas just again didn't hit a land on the iteration, which is huge.
Can't
Counterspell
that one
down. Oh, and then there's another fetch land. So if Josh wants,
that'll be 4 life. Here comes
God.
mana, and then, like you said, the other Flooded Strand represents gaining 4 life on Nicholas Bradley's turn, and now suddenly, Omnath enters the fray, and this is what we're talking about. Suddenly the door feels like it's slamming shut for Nicholas Bradley and his ability to win this game as this Omnath continues to trigger turn after turn.
Oh, it's so
going to be
brutal.
really powerful.
And there's an endurance in hand. There's double Solitude. I mean, that is
here's a copy of Solitude. Why don't we get rid of that Ledger Shredder?
It's the connive. That's nice.
Get a little connive action for your trouble, at least.
Take that one with you.
Let's see. Bobble may be a little slow at this point.
Man, Nicholas was like in such a good spot too.
Yeah, I mean that's it, right? Like Nicholas had did it all right, protected the threats, kind of stumbled Josh with the counter spells and was laying the beatdowns with the flying evasive creatures, but literally that one stumble on that one expressive iteration, and suddenly Omnath's just slamming the door shut. And that is the power of this 4-color blink deck, especially in this particular matchup, where things like life totals matter a lot. Omnath just gains so much life, and when you're looking at cards and mana and just the ability to catch up from all of the stumbling that the Murktide deck has kind of forced you into, Omnath just fixes all your problems, and we're seeing that at work right here, right now. Here's an endurance.
What I will say is that turn where Nicholas played Expressive Iteration, so they had 3 mana available. It is so juicy to want to iteration because chances of hitting a land are probably pretty good. I don't know the exact percent at that point in the game, but pretty high, I would assume. But it's so juicy to want to use that spell. But I think maybe Nicholas will go back and watch this game and think, maybe I should have just waited because they knew about Omnath hanging out. So I don't know. It's tough. If you do wait, you stumble on lands. If you don't wait, you have this. This is the thing that happens. So it's really, really a tight squeeze.
For sure. And Unholy Heat's the draw, would normally answer Omnath. Josh Warsaw, confident enough to be like, look, I have another Omnath. I'll just reveal that to you. I mean, we can keep playing if you want. This is Expressive Iteration. I think Josh Warsaw likes his position here quite a bit. Murktide, Steam Vince, Dragon's Rage Channeler. Dragon's Rage Channeler does threaten to maybe fill up the graveyard really quickly. Maybe turn on this Unholy Heat for shutting down this Omnath. But if you turn on Delirium, then you have to run your Dragon's Rage Channelers directly into this endurance. So, problems on multiple areas of the playmat for Nicholas Bradley.
Yeah, when your opponent leans back in the chair with their arms crossed and just starts staring at you, that's probably the worst feeling.
You think that might be a time where it might be time to start doing the math on your odds to succeed this game, huh?
Yeah, that's rough. My opponent's, bouncing their legs, their arms crossed, just staring at me, waiting for me to scoop my cards up. I'm like, all right, listen, I paid money to play. In
Like, are we doing
okay?
this? Are we good? We can play it out. Like we can play it out if you want. I mean, like
I paid
I'm
money to
fine
put
to
this
bounce the ball
expressive
in your
iteration
face
in
for
my
a few
deck.
turns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love moving my cards around. I showed up with this deck. Like, yeah.
I will resolve my cantrip before I scoop my cards. Thank you very much. All right. So Nicholas
Yeah,
Bradley
for
finds
sure.
his
I mean,
sequence.
that's very much me. I'm gonna resolve your cantrips before you scoop up your cards. I love casting the expressive iteration. I'm gonna get my equity out of it.
You got to squeeze all the juice out of the orange before you put it in the trash cans. So
For sure. And, you know, and now suddenly, you know, the last hero of our top four may be looking like they will be felled to Josh Warsaw, and the power of Omnath Locus creation might be revving up for another 4-color blink mirror for Zach Allen, who just dispatched Jesse Robkins in the semifinals. Have to wonder if, you know, Zach maybe foresaw this playing out this way, not just with his deck building, not just with his approach, but even his execution as he finds himself once again in the finals of an NRG trial in the modern format.
yeah, I'm gonna have to scoop up an energy drink or a coffee or something to have another 4-color mirror happen in the finals.
you gotta get excited about it. This is gonna be on
Yeah. Oh,
that action.
yeah. I'm pumped.
I love it. And here's the beatdowns. A lot of power coming across. 17 points, right?
Yeah, it's quite a bit.
No,
So,
I'm sorry. It is only 13. Math is very difficult for me at this early in the morning, but fortunately, it's not difficult for Josh. As here's an Unholy Heath, this one without Delirium. Josh says, "Okay, sure, that's fine. You can kill my Solitude."
it's so funny.
Get a couple surveils at it first.
That's another endurance just hanging out in Josh's hand too. Like, yeah, all right, whatever. You want to fill the graveyard? Cool.
Yeah, I mean, this would normally threaten to make some Dragon's Rage Channelers 3/3s, maybe make them a little bit better at blocking here. Maybe can align something like a double block on Omnath, try to stifle that. But we already know Josh is another Omnath. Josh is another Endurance. Everything coming up Josh Warsaw here. Nicholas really just can't catch a break.
Yeah, brutal stuff. Oh,
Looks like going to do a little bit of math.
taking it. Just take it. That's good.
All right.
Is there a
Yes,
way?
yeah.
Is there a way? No, there's not because of this endurance. I would say, is there a way that Nicholas could like squeak in 7 points? Now 10 points because the Solitude hit. Does not look like it at this point though.
Yeah, if there's a land drop, then it's 14 points. There's a lot of problems when it comes to trying to assemble a direct damage kill with things like lightning bolts and Dragon's Rage channelers here. As you mentioned, the endurance certainly going to be a problem among the mix. I have to imagine that is the door on all outs for Nicholas Bradley is another copy of endurance. But even beyond that, even if just like a land plus like buy Yorion and play Yorion, right? Like, do we even have 8 mana for that? If we do, I think that's just a problematic thing on its own right.
There's 3 mana, maybe.
Yeah, it looks.
You know my biggest problem. You know my biggest problem with the 4-color blink deck is.
What's your biggest problem with the 4-color blink deck?
Is I can no longer play Dredge because of this deck. There's too many endurance that I just can't play the deck anymore. I just can't do it.
I think if you gave me a list of things that disappoint me about the 4-color deck and its impact on the modern metagame, the removal of Dredge from the metagame as a downside might be close to the bottom.
Yeah.
I don't think that is something that is I would even necessarily consider a bug. That is a feature to me.
You know what? Speak for yourself.
I am noticing a rift in how you and I prefer to play Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, I like my graveyard decks.
That's fair. You know, honestly, endurance is frustrating for me as the Dragon's Rage Chandler player, right? Like that card I mean, we're seeing this in action in HD right here. Endurances versus Dragon's Rage Chandlers. That's my frustration with the pitch elementals is it makes my cheap Izzet cards look embarrassing when your cards cost 0 mana.
Yeah, card's quite good. So you see the namesake of the Izzet Murktide deck getting put on the stack here. Figuring out for how much.
2 counters potentially.
That's what it looks like up there. I believe it's Unholy Heat and Archmage's Charm up there hanging out.
Murktide Regent looks like a little bit of discussion here. Trying to figure out how we want to cast this Murktide Regent. Want to leave the land or not? I have to imagine you kind of want to leave the land. Nicholas disagrees. Here's 2 counters, a 5/5. Impressive,
Coming
honestly,
in.
that this Murktide Regent was able to come down with counters after double endurance.
Yeah, you know. All right, I'm gonna scoop them up here. So Josh Warsaw gonna punch their ticket to the finals. Gonna be rewarded with a mirror match here as we come back to us. Yeah, I mean, I think again, I hammered it when it happened. Is we're gonna go back and rewatch that. If you want to go back and rewatch that game, you're gonna see that turn where we had bounced and Omnath with a subtlety on the Isn't Murktide side, had a counterspell in hand with 3 lands, chose to tap 2 of them to expressive iteration, didn't find the 4th land. I think that was the big turning point of the game. Obviously, just stumbled on the land and couldn't counterspell. Just the 4-color player just kind of did their thing and was like, oh, well, there's no resistance here. I might as well just play all my stuff. And really swung the game around. And it was crazy how fast it turned from like, oh, the the Murktide player's in pretty good shape. Giant Legislator. This might do it. And then it was just like complete 180. Game swung for the 4-color deck. And here we are.